how do you know if you have A players, right? David, this is your muscle, man. Why don't you take over here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Colin. And I love what you just covered there in terms of the profitability of the practice and how A players are direct correlation to that. A lot of you have probably heard the term culture. What is the culture in my practice? Some of you might believe in culture and some of you might not. What I can tell you is when you can create an intentional culture that fits the kind of practice that you're trying to build based on the goals that you're trying to achieve, culture is what unlocks your people. When your people are walking into a culture that is effective and healthy for them, they get unlocked. And when you unlock your people, that's when you start to unlock the potential of your practice. And when you unlock the potential of your practice, that's where profitability starts to go up. A lot of you guys have heard about our 5 A's, the end-to-end money funnel. When you have a team of A players that are executing in your practice, you start to see small to medium increases across all 5 of those areas in your practice. And as that compounds, it creates a drastic change in your P&L. It creates a drastic change in your profitability and the overall stability of your practice. So when we look at A players and how do we actually define what an A player is, going back to what Colin was talking about before, an A player for one practice is not going to be necessarily an A player for another. Now, the sports world is a great world to draw references on this, winning championships. If any of you guys know about the New England Patriots, the Patriots way, a terrible player for one team gets picked up by the Patriots and they're a star the next season. A great player for the Patriots goes to another team and you never hear from them again. The San Antonio Spurs, similar with Popovich. When you can intentionally design the team and the practice that you want and the culture within it, then you will be more effective at bringing people into your environment and getting the most out of them. Now, we talk about it as the A player profile, and we break it up into 3 different components, and we want to go into each component here so that you guys can understand not just how they all work, but what are the outcomes if you are missing 1 and maybe even 2 of the 3 components so that you guys can bump that up against the things that you've seen with your team. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide here, Colin. This is typically where where most practices focus. They just focus on skill set. I'm going to recruit however I'm recruiting. I'm going to bring people in. I'm going to put them through some technical interviews to see if they can do the job. And if I feel like they have a good personality and I would want to, have a conversation with them or have fun hanging out with them on a daily basis in the practice, and they have the skills, then they're my person. Well, the problem with this is highly skilled people who are not passionate about the impact that you want the practice to ultimately have on the community that you're serving, that creates low passion and low loyalty level to the practice. So you have somebody that is technically skilled, but they're not passionate about their job. And there's a bit of, I'm just going through the motions. There's a bit of this doing just enough. I'm technically skilled, but I'm just not a hard worker. Well, is it that I'm not a hard worker, or is it that I'm not fired up every day about the impact that I'm having in the world, within the role and within the job that I'm in? Now, highly skilled people who approach their work differently, that is where we start to breed low trust and low drama. They might be technically sound, but the patient and team environment is off and it's hindering the practice's potential. And trust is a foundational level of any high-performing team. And when I approach the work differently than the other people around me, that subconsciously decays the trust level that I have in those around me. And that's where we start to see drama that impacts performance. We're going to get to that. We'll get into that in a little bit more here in the next few slides. So let's start with impact. When we look at impact, we want to look at the passion that's tied to the core impact that the practice, and ultimately you as the leader of the practice, strives to have on the community that it serves. Now, for the majority of practices that we work with, the impact that the doctor wants to have on the community that it serves is either thought to be obvious, but it's not, or it's not really thought of at all because it's packed in their subconscious and it's just innately who they are. It's why they started the practice. It's why they've worked years, decades, every single day, every single week, every single month to try to drive this thing forward. But it's something that's so native to them, they don't understand that the rest of their team might not be clear on that because they are not them. If your team is not you, what's obvious to you is not obvious to everybody else. And the impact that you want to have is not necessarily clear to everybody else on your team unless you start articulating that to them, unless you can get clear with them on what that impact is and allow them to figure out if that's something that drives passion inside of them.
The dentist.
Now, go ahead.
The dentist is the visionary on it. In your practice, you're the visionary.
Yep.
And that means you have the vision. And you've got to set the vision and your job is to get everybody else to see the vision too. Sorry. Yep. I think that's a very powerful point.
That's fantastic. And we've actually had some practices and some doctors come to us and say, hey, well, I'll let my team set that direction. And that doesn't actually work because as a practice leader, as Colin said, as the visionary, it's your job to set the direction. It's your job to set where the North Star is. And the reason being is because you're the one that's going to be in the practice forever. Our team isn't necessarily going to be. The reason is because they will feed off your passion and your fire. And if you're trying to create passion and fire around something, a different definition than they created, or their definition is not aligned with yours, it creates a lack of alignment in what we're doing, and we can't get everybody on the same page. As Colin said, you as the visionary there, it is your job to set that. Now, it's probably a little too much to say that we want our team members to be jumping out of bed every morning because they're so excited about the impact and their contribution to that impact within the community that we're serving. But it's really not that far off. We do want our team talking about that impact with their family and friends. We want them to be energized by the impact that they're having on others. Here's a little tip for you. The more that your team isn't thinking about themselves, the less drama they're going to bring into your practice. The more your team is thinking about the care and the service that they can provide to the community and to the patients that you're serving, the less they're going to be thinking about themselves and the less drama you're going to start to see in your practice. We won't completely avoid it, but that is where drama comes from most often. It's when we're more worried about ourselves than others. So this passion and this impact in this direction, it's your job to set and it's your job to reiterate. It's your job to show examples of this. It's your job to define what this actually means. So that, as we said before, if you can clearly define this, then you can put a message out there. Similar to Batman, you can throw out a beacon, a sign, and people that need that and want that, they can be attracted to you because it's clear. Now, approach. Approach is how we naturally approach our work on a day-to-day basis. It's how we approach our life on a day-to-day basis. Some of you guys have probably heard this being referred to as core values. The name really doesn't matter. The key on this is that we as people, we all don't approach our work and we don't approach our life the same way. In this country today, you can see a very divided approach on how we want to live our lives or handle the current circumstances, whether it be political or health-wise. And then you have everybody in between. Not everybody is the same. And then if you go to country, then it starts to get really dramatic. But the approach is really, really critical. Now, when you have a high level of alignment on the approach, that is where your trust levels on your team start to go up. Now, when I talk about trust levels, I'm not referring to, hey, do we trust whether or not this person is going to steal my wallet, or are they going to do something that's not ethical? That's not the trust that I'm talking about here. The trust that I'm talking about here is what I subconsciously expect from you. Am I going to get that? Like Colin referred to earlier, in a practice that is very culture focused, where it's very people focused, very connection focused. When when a new hire comes into the practice and they are very process oriented and they treat people like cogs in a machine because they came from a practice that was all about numbers and producing, which is not wrong, by the way, but was all about cranking out as many visits as possible. When that happens and I see a teammate treating patients like this, I suddenly lose trust in whether or not they're going to handle things the way that I expect them to be handled. And when that trust starts to decay, then that's where, from a foundational level, we start to separate as a team. Now, trust levels on the team are extremely important. I don't know if you guys have ever read Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Lencioni. Trust or lack of trust leads to a lack of healthy conflict. And when we're not engaging in healthy conflict, then we're not getting on the same page and we're not all in lockstep, as Colin would say. And when that happens, that starts to create a lot of problems in our execution and our accountability. So trust is very important, and all three of these elements are what will drive trust in the practice, specifically the approach. Now, what does it mean if go ahead, Colin?
I was going to say, do you want to go into the 5 dysfunctions of a team, or do you want to stay on presentation here?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're doing that, this is a great book for all of you guys to read. It's a quick read. This is a really good opportunity for you guys to be able to evaluate what's going on in your own practice with your team and really start to understand the ramifications of it. Because we're all experiencing this at some level on our teams. But once we can understand the ramifications of these dysfunctions, then it can put us into a more definitive place of taking action to go solve it, as opposed to reducing the significance of it and then just ultimately deciding to deal with it.
So yeah, this actually isn't a quote from the book, but I love this quote so much that I put this at the top of this PDF. Smart people have really good answers. Wise people have really good questions. And I think that goes back to what I was talking about earlier. At the beginning of this, when I said our mind creates a lot of outcomes for us. If we don't think something's possible, whether you believe it you can or believe you can't, you're probably right. And I think when we keep asking questions, that creates the power in finding the answer. So here, I'll let you kick back over here to talk about the dysfunctions and then the temptation side.
Yeah, so the name of the book is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and it's by Lencioni. The first dysfunction, the foundational, think of this as a pyramid. The foundational issue or dysfunction of teams is an absence of trust. When I don't trust my team, or when I don't trust that I'm going to get from them what it is that I expect, then I have a fear of being vulnerable with those team members. And the big issue with me being vulnerable with those team members is in our morning huddles. It's in our front office and back office meetings. It's in those conversations where we as a group are trying to figure out what are the key things that we need to go do to solve the problems that are facing either the practice or our patients or whatever else. When we're trying to tackle those things and improve our practice, because hopefully everybody on this webinar is trying to improve their practice every week, every month, every quarter, every year. When we get the team together to try to ideate on that and figure that out, what you're going to have is when people don't trust one another, they're not going to be vulnerable and they're not going to voice the concerns and issues that they have or the things that they're seeing in all of that, because we get to part 2. They have a fear of conflict. Most people have this desire to preserve this artificial harmony, and it stifles people's ability to actually dive deep and actually come up with solutions within a group environment that ideation will start to build upon itself. So if we don't have trust, suddenly we have a fear of conflict and we don't have the conversations that we need to have and the discussions or debates that we need to have to really identify the problems that our practice is facing so that we can solve them. Because guess what, guys? There are a lot of practices out there that are spending a lot of time and energy solving problems, and they're solving them, but they were the wrong problems. And when you solve the wrong problem, you don't actually remove the obstacle. I think you bring up this quote a lot, Colin, was sharpening the axe. Abraham Lincoln, I think he said, if I had 6 hours to chop wood, I would spend the first 5.5 hours sharpening my axe. It's that kind of thing. We have to make sure we identify the right problem first, and then and only then.
It's just like with your patients. If you get a patient that presents and you misdiagnose and you start doing a crown on the wrong tooth or a root canal on the wrong tooth, that patient's going to leave with the exact same problem they came with. And that's the same way in business. It's the same way with teams and people. It's the same way with your mechanic on the car. If you came in for a knocking sound in your engine and they change your oil or your transmission fluid, you're probably going to leave with a knock in your engine again. Yep. That just is what it is. And this translates definitely very strongly into the team. We got to diagnose the right problem.
So now, because we're having that fear of conflict, and we're potentially not solving or diagnosing the right problem, we're going to go spin up and spend a lot of energy in the wrong direction. Ultimately, what then happens is, because we didn't have the right conversation, whatever we decide on as a team to go do, I'm probably not aligned to. I'm not committed to it. Because I have 4 or 5 things that I'm thinking in my head that are in contradiction to that I didn't actually speak up on. So now that fear of conflict and the lack of speaking up has created a lack of commitment in what we have chosen to do as a team to go solve the problem. Now from here, it gets pretty clear, I hope, for everybody. As soon as our team is not committed to what's going on, that then creates an avoidance of accountability. As soon as it starts to go sour or it's not working, I told you, I knew it. I knew this wasn't going to work.
Everything.
Tearing down and figuring it out.
Blame
What's
game.
that?
Blame game. Oh, yeah.
Right. And that lack of the avoidance of accountability is directly tied to the lack of commitment on the very solution that we were going after to begin with, because I wasn't able, or I didn't feel comfortable voicing my opinion. I feared disrupting harmony because I don't trust certain members of the team. And we know if people do not feel accountable for the results, we know that they're not going to get the results, and the results won't be there. So if we flip this thing over, if we want to get results, we need to make sure that our team feels really accountable to the results that we have to go get and the execution. They need to be fully committed to the plan that we've created. And to be able to be fully committed, they need to be a part of the discussion and a part of the debate. And we need to have healthy debate. We don't need to be yelling at one another, but we also don't need to have harmony for harmony's sake to make sure that everybody feels okay, or we're not going to really be able to have the hard conversations necessary amongst a bunch of different minds in different roles that are seeing the world differently, to make sure that we identify the best problem and the best approach going forward. And that all comes down to trust. And so much of trust is based on this profile that we're giving you. So not only is it the thing that you want to go use to go identify who you're going to recruit as an A player to bring into your practice, little advanced tip here, it's also the development plan that you can have for everybody in your practice as well. For the current team members, we want to focus on these areas.
I think the power of, this is the dysfunction of the team, yep. But the power in understanding the dysfunction of the team is equally understanding the other side of the coin, which is the temptation of the CEO, Dennis, the temptation of the leader, the visionary in the practice. When you start looking at status over results, and let's skim through this. This wasn't part of our time tonight, but I think this is really, really good that we hit this. Going for popularity over accountability. If you're not having the difficult conversations with your team, you're going for popularity. And we're going to have a segment on difficult conversations coming up here in the next few weeks around how that needs to sound. Certainty over clarity. Holy cow. I've talked about this, I think, every webinar for the past month. When you have a high degree of certainty that something is or isn't going to happen, that is often when you have the greatest risk, because you have a lack of clarity. When you don't know what's going to happen, you have very low certainty. Oftentimes you have very high clarity when you have low certainty, because you have to. If you don't know what's going to happen, you got your eyes wide open, right? And you're trying to figure out what's going on. Harmony over conflict, invulnerability over trust. And most problems, if not every failure, is based around a lack of courage to do one of these 9 things, right? If you aren't succeeding with what you're doing and you're succumbing to the temptations of the CEO, or you've got dysfunction in your team, one of these 9 things is going to apply to you. You're not facing reality. You're not asking for help. You're not admitting to mistakes. You're not listening to advice with the intent to understand. You're not acknowledging your blind spots without being defensive. You're not doing the thinking to participate in your own solution, right? You're not questioning about the performance and directions and decisions happening within your practice. You're not encouraging candor and accountability, and not making the hard decisions and having those difficult conversations. If you want to be a dentist, go work for somebody else. If all you want to be is a dentist, go become an associate. And I promise you, you can clock in at 8 and clock out at 5, or probably is the case today, clock in at 7 and clock out at 7 when you go work for one of the 12-hour dental chains or second shift dental chains or whatever corporate America is doing right now. And you won't have to face the difficult challenges of owning a business or owning your own practice. But the reason that you own your own practice is because you want to do things differently. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight.
Yeah. So, to close that off, if you guys have ever felt like you're not getting enough engagement from your team because they don't care, from certain team members, well, it might be because there's a root issue of trust. If you feel like people are just giving up and they're not giving it their all, and they don't feel like they're really bought in or passionate about what the practice is doing, maybe the root issue is trust. If you can get to the root issue that's causing these things, that's where you'll see that the majority of our people, when they come in, they want to be successful. They want to contribute. They want to feel good about what they're doing for the practice. Something is keeping them from doing that. Now, the definition that we have here around the A-player profile is so very critical, because when we look at recruiting for this role, for any of the roles that we have to make sure that we understand who we're recruiting for. Like Colin has said multiple times in this presentation, if you don't understand the kind of cases, if you don't understand what better patients are and how you define better patients, then how is your marketing going to go set out a message to go attract those people in? Yep. When you're marketing to everyone, you're marketing to no one. And when your recruiting message is for everyone, it's for no one as well. And it's that same problem that the vast majority of practices are falling into. And this strategy is going to give you a way to differentiate in this market and allow you to have a resounding message so you can grab the most talented people in your area. Now, the next part of the A-player profile, like we referred to before, is skill set. As we move on to the next slide here, the skill set is it is the core competencies for the role, but what we constantly encourage is understand what the role's measurable outcomes are. Just because someone has a skill set, that doesn't mean that they can produce the outcome that we want or that the practice needs. And that very much aligns to the profitability that we have in our practice. So we need to make sure that the measurable outcomes are 100% clear as a numeric way to understand if the competencies are working in the way that we want them to. Now, one of the things that we've seen a lot in other areas, other methods, is you create a numbers-driven practice if you do this incorrectly. That is not what this is about. People actually want to understand what success looks like, and they do want a clear and objective definition for performance, because then it can give them something that they can go achieve, and they're not wondering if their job is secure, or they're not wondering if they're doing a great job. It's not based on whether or not they feel like the doctor is having a good day or not, and whether or not they just got ignored, or whether the doctor is having a long conversation with them first thing in the morning.
Yep.
Their objective score, that objective measurement, gives them the clarity on what they have to go create. It gives them the ability to understand if they're creating it, so that they can feel safe and confident in what they're doing.